Guys, please do subscribe our channel and support us. Canada just sent a message to Donald Trump. And this time, the message hit where it hurts most. Not through angry speeches, not through military threats, not through dramatic headlines, but through something far more dangerous in modern politics: economic pressure. And according to growing reports from both sides of the border, the effects are becoming impossible to ignore. Because while political fights usually stay trapped inside television studios and social media arguments, this conflict is now reaching real businesses, real workers, and real communities across North America. And suddenly, what once sounded like political theater is starting to look very real. The tension exploded after growing accusations that figures connected to MAGA politics were quietly supporting separatist movements inside Alberta, one of Canada's most important energy-producing provinces. Now, for many Americans, that may sound confusing at first. But inside Canada, the reaction was explosive. Because to Canadians, this wasn't viewed as ordinary political disagreement anymore. It was viewed as interference, a direct challenge to national unity. And the situation became even more dramatic when a Canadian court stepped in and blocked a controversial separatist referendum tied to Alberta politics. The ruling immediately triggered celebrations among Canadians who believed the country had just avoided a dangerous political crisis. But what made this story truly fascinating was who helped stop it. Indigenous communities. First Nations leaders argued the referendum violated treaty obligations and constitutional protections that could not simply be ignored for political convenience. And when the court agreed, the decision instantly transformed from a regional political dispute into something much bigger: a national statement about sovereignty, identity, and the future of Canada itself. Suddenly, this wasn't just about Alberta anymore. It became about whether Canada would allow outside political pressure to divide the country internally. And Canadians responded fast. Prime Minister Mark Carney wasted no time traveling directly to Alberta after the ruling. But instead of delivering emotional speeches filled with anger, he did something much more strategic. He focused on unity, strength, independence, and economic resilience. Carney framed the moment not as a crisis, but as a turning point. A moment for Canada to become more self-reliant, more energy independent, and less vulnerable to political instability coming from outside pressures. That message resonated powerfully because many Canadians already felt exhausted by growing tensions with the United States. Tariff fights, trade threats, political insults, talk about annexation. For a lot of Canadians, enough was enough, and Carney understood something important. People don't just want leaders who react emotionally. They want leaders who make them feel protected, stable, confident about the future. That's why his speeches focused heavily on energy, infrastructure, and economic sovereignty. He repeatedly emphasized that Canada must become stronger internally instead of depending too heavily on unpredictable foreign relationships. And honestly, that message is gaining traction, especially as economic retaliation against the United States quietly intensifies. Because while politicians argue publicly, ordinary Canadians have already started fighting back in their own way. Through boycotts, travel changes, business decisions, consumer behavior. And according to recent reports, the impact has become massive. Travel from Canada into parts of the United States has reportedly dropped sharply in several regions. Tourism-heavy areas that relied heavily on Canadian visitors are suddenly struggling. Hotels, restaurants, retail stores, entertainment districts, entire local economies built around Canadian tourism are feeling pressure. And here's the political problem for Republicans. Many of those struggling areas happen to sit in politically competitive regions. That means economic frustration could quickly become electoral frustration. Because when businesses lose customers and workers lose income, voters start demanding answers. One of the most powerful examples came from Las Vegas. For years, Canadian tourists represented a major source of business for casinos, hotels, restaurants, and service workers. Now, many tourism operators are reporting major declines in Canadian visitors. And unlike political rhetoric, empty hotel rooms are impossible to spin positively. Workers notice, managers notice, communities notice. The boycott isn't happening because Canadians suddenly hate Americans. That's important to understand. Most Canadians still deeply value their relationship with ordinary American people. What changed is trust in political leadership. Many Canadians increasingly feel that their country is being treated disrespectfully or aggressively for domestic political gain. And consumer behavior reflects emotion. When people feel insulted or threatened, they often stop spending money in places connected to that frustration. That's exactly what appears to be happening now. Meanwhile, another fascinating shift is quietly happening underneath all of this. Canadian businesses are starting to explore alternatives. New partnerships in Europe, new trade discussions in Asia, new investments outside traditional American relationships. Not because replacing the US market is easy, it absolutely isn't, but because businesses everywhere crave predictability. And unpredictability scares investors. That's why Carney's message about building a stronger and more independent Canada matters politically. He's trying to convince Canadians that instability can become opportunity, that the country can adapt instead of panic. And so far, many Canadians seem willing to follow that vision. At the same time, political pressure inside Alberta remains intense. Separatist movements haven't disappeared completely. Far from it. Some groups remain furious over the court decision. Others accuse federal leaders of ignoring regional frustrations. And tensions surrounding oil, energy policy, and provincial identity continue simmering beneath the surface. But the court ruling changed the momentum dramatically, because now the movement faces a legal and constitutional wall much larger than simple political disagreement. And perhaps most importantly, Canadians across different regions suddenly became more aware of how vulnerable national unity can become during periods of outside political pressure. That awareness itself may change Canadian politics for years. One of the most emotional moments came from political voices urging Canadians not to lose focus during the conflict. The message was simple. Progress doesn't happen all at once. You don't win every battle instantly. You simply keep moving forward. That message resonated because many people feel overwhelmed by constant political chaos globally right now. Trade wars, economic instability, social division, international tensions. People are tired. And when people are tired, they search for stability and purpose. That's partly why messages about unity, resilience, and national identity are becoming so powerful again across many countries. Now, to be clear, tensions between Canada and the United States are unlikely to suddenly disappear overnight. The economies remain deeply connected. The cultures remain closely tied. Families, businesses, and industries still depend on cooperation across the border every single day. But something important has clearly shifted. Canadians are no longer treating these conflicts as temporary political drama. Increasingly, many see them as long-term warnings. Warnings that Canada may need to become more independent economically, politically, and strategically moving forward. And honestly, that shift could reshape North American politics more than people realize. Because once trust begins eroding between close allies, rebuilding it becomes difficult, especially when economic pressure enters the equation. That's why this story matters beyond partisan politics. It's about how quickly relationships between nations can change once political conflict becomes personal for ordinary citizens. Tourists stop traveling, businesses stop investing, consumers stop spending, and eventually those small individual decisions combine into something much larger. A real economic and political shift. Right now, that shift is already happening. Quietly, steadily, and both governments know it. The biggest question now is whether leaders on both sides can calm tensions before the damage becomes permanent. Because history shows something important. Trade wars rarely produce true winners, but they often leave long-lasting scars. And if this conflict continues escalating emotionally instead of strategically, those scars may shape the relationship between Canada and the United States for an entire generation. For now, though, many Canadians believe they just scored a major victory. Not because every problem disappeared, but because for the first time in months, they feel like they pushed back successfully. And in moments of national uncertainty, that feeling alone can become incredibly powerful.